welcome to the OP Overwatch podcast. I'm your host, Jam, and I'm here with my co-host, Jeff. How's it going, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I've been playing a lot of the game, and it has been still just fun as hell. It's been a great game. Excellent battles over the past few days. I'm playing with a lot of different characters, and it's still going strong, even a couple weeks after. How about you? How's your experience been over the past few days, kind of getting familiar with more characters?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. I've been pretty impressed with the matchmaking system, actually. It seems like I am constantly getting into games where everyone is roughly the same level, and pretty competitive games even when I have to queue up by myself. So I've been pretty impressed with the matchmaking.
Yeah, the matchmaking is actually pretty impressive. I've noticed that myself as well, because a lot of games, when you're doing the online competitive aspect of it, the matchmaking, it'll pull together players that are of vastly different skill levels. So you'll have pros playing against people that maybe have just jumped into the game. And it's really hard to manage this, I feel, as a game company, because, you know, a lot of people that just jump in for the first few times might just innately be better at games. So it's hard to tell there. But most of the time when people play a game for a long time, they're just going to improve, you know, some faster than others. So when you have a, say, rank, 30 to 40 player go against a rank 5, 10, or 15, there's going to be a massive difference in skill. So some games don't do this right. They just pair anybody against anybody. But for whatever reason, whenever there's been any matches that are clearly one-sided in Overwatch, it seems to remedy that pretty quick and find you another group that's a little closer to your skill level, which I think keeps the fun going, and it gets rid of a lot of the frustration in the game.
Yeah, definitely. It's been remarkable to me, not only how good the matchmaking system is at making good games, but the overall improvement of the community. It seems that players are just getting a lot better, which I guess should be expected, but it's hard to get a good play of the game anymore with, like, Pharah. Week 1, every time Pharah used her ultimate, 5 people died, and now people see it coming, people shoot Pharah out of the sky, people scatter. So, I mean, there's definitely been an evolution to it and a growth. So I did want to address one thing that I think it's a really cool thing that Blizzard did with this, and it's relevant to today's episode because we're going to talk about a character today, Symmetra. It's the first one we've talked about that has shield as part of her health pool. So one thing that it's a kind of a subtle thing, but I'm really impressed with what Blizzard did here, is the difference between health versus shields versus armor. Different characters have different things that basically add up to their health pool. So the ones we've talked about so far are just straight HP. Some characters have shields, and some have armor built into their health pool, like Bastion or Reinhardt. And so without going into too much detail about exactly how the armor mitigates everything, suffice to say that armor takes less damage than regular health, and shields takes the same, but shields regen on their own after they get out of combat. I think it's really cool what they did here, because it's a way to just add depth and add kind of a unique flair to some characters. And so, yeah, I'm excited to dive into this today, but I just wanted to address that really quickly because I think it's pretty cool, and we haven't talked about it before.
It is very cool because I think most games that you play, it's either health or shields or maybe both. But it's true what you're saying about the uniqueness for the characters, because if you look at Overwatch, we have characters that are clearly armor-driven, like Torbjorn and Reinhardt, but then you have characters that are more technology-driven, and they focus on those shields, like Symmetra. So it's a really interesting distinction between the characters, and having those very minute but extremely important differences between the characters is a huge deal.
Yeah, it's really cool, and it can affect how you play, too. I mean, being aware of that, like Zarya, for example, is a tank that half of her health is shields, and they can't be healed by regular abilities or health packs. So, if you're playing Mercy, and Zarya is at 3/4 of their health, you don't really need to go heal them, because they're fine, and you can't do anything for them. But, once they drop past half health, that's kind of the danger zone. That's where you can heal them. That's where it's not going to regen on its own. So you got to be aware of stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty neat how it just added some depth to it and increases what you need to know to be really effective at the game.
Oh my God, Zarya. I cannot wait to get to her because she is a very fascinating character, and she plays like no one I've ever played before. But for today, our character breakdowns, lately we have been doing more in-depth character breakdowns, and we have already covered Tracer, Reaper, and Genji, which are all attack class. We consider them flanking class, so they're very good at getting in close, kind of disrupting the defending forces of your opponent. But the character that we're going to start with is going to be Hanzo.
Duty is the only destiny I know.
So Hanzo is an interesting character because he is a bowman. He's an assassin, very much of the Japanese culture. You know, it's just very apparent in his personality, very traditional, whereas a lot of the characters in Overwatch have guns and technology. Hanzo literally fights with a bow and arrow. Now, it's not just a standard bow and arrow. There are caveats to it which make it very unique. However, if he was to be classified compared to some other characters, he is definitely more of a sniper type character. His actual role in the game is a defense role, which is interesting because you can play him, and most people do play him pretty defensively, but I've also seen him used on the offensive as well. And man, if you know how to play Hanzo, it is a lot of fun. He is just a blast. There's a high that you get when you're just nailing headshot after headshot with his bow. But he's a blast to play, and he has a lot of mobility as well and very interesting abilities.
Yeah, Hanzo is really cool. I think it's pretty cool. I know you've mentioned to me before that he's actually an offshoot, that Hanzo and Genji were originally one character, which is funny to imagine if you had both their abilities in one character, so it's probably good they split them.
Yeah, he might have been a little broken.
But yeah, Hanzo's really cool. He's categorized as defense, as you said, but I think he's one of the more balanced characters in the game. Technically, a sniper can hold his own against Widowmaker, but also has the ability to engage in more medium and sometimes even close range. Not that that's what you necessarily want. So it makes him pretty effective on defense and on attack, moving payloads or capturing points. He can really do it all, and it's pretty cool with the bow. You never have to reload. You can just constantly be knocking another arrow. So yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, the ability to have a long-range weapon that you don't have to reload is definitely an advantage. I will say it's balanced out by the fact that it does take time to draw the bow back, but it's not a huge amount of time in between bows. It's kind of what you'd expect for notching an arrow and pulling it back. And Hanzo has a 200-point health pool, so he can go down pretty quick. He's not a tank by any means. You don't want to be up close in a firefight with him. But after having a few matches once the game was released, one of the things I really realized is his role as a defense character is very important, and I feel the best way to kind of get used to Hanzo is to just kind of hang back behind your team and play him as a sniper. It's going to give you a chance to adapt to his weapon, which is much different from a gun. You're going to get, you need to make sure that one shot that you're going to make is going to count before taking a couple seconds to draw back another bow. But man, when it lands, it does some damage, and it is an interesting weapon because it also has the physics of a bow. So when you shoot the arrow, it actually does drop over time as it's traveling a distance, whereas a bullet will just go straight ahead the entire time. So there's a little bit of coordinating and calculating where it's going to land, but you can make some pretty ridiculous shots with his bow. And like I said, they do a lot of damage, so there's a lot of opportunity there to really throw off your opponents.
Yeah, definitely. And so as you mentioned, the arrows do dip when fired. Pretty cool that there's no damage fall off, though. So similar to Widowmaker, I guess they categorize him as a sniper for that reason. So he's going to do the same damage from max range if you can account for the gravity pulling the arrow down and land your shots from distance. I mean, it's pretty cool. You can use that dip to your advantage. Like if you're on a lower terrain, you can fire shots that aren't fully charged and fire them up over a ledge, and they'll just dip down, and you can land some trick shots that way. So yeah, there's definitely some creativity to the character. You can really get comfortable and get a feel for how the arrows are going to react. And there's definitely value to using shots that aren't fully charged. Obviously, the fully charged shots do more damage, but for finishing off low health opponents or chasing someone down that's running around a corner. You can run full speed while you're just firing the low energy arrows. And so you can be firing off projectiles and not lose any speed.
Yeah, and not only with his arrows, when you get in close, I think Hanzo's biggest weakness is when he's in way too close, unless you can absolutely nail someone with an arrow at point blank, which can be tough depending on who you're fighting. It's a lot easier on say a tank like Reinhardt or Roadhog than it would be to hit a Tracer. But yeah, before we actually move out to his other abilities, I do want to throw out there that similar to Genji, he actually does have the ability to wall climb, which him and Genji both have this ability, and it's one of those things where you wouldn't think it's a big deal, but in a game where not really anyone else can do that, and getting height on your opponent, both for getting a good position as a sniper and for escaping danger, it's a really awesome ability to use that I feel like maybe a lot of players that first start out might not even think to use in certain situations. It's a really good way to be mobile, to get up to places, to escape from attacks, and I use it all the time.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. The wall climb, it is a big deal. I think most people have it in their head that it's just for positioning, to get Hanzo up to places where he can snipe from. And you mentioned using it to escape, which is certainly valid also. Maybe it's the Genji in me, but I really like to use it in combat. You can create some space. So if someone does rush you and they're right in your face, you can jump, wall climb, and leap off the wall and fire down on them and create some space to get your shot off. So it's really good to combine that with a scatter arrow, which is one of his abilities, where he fires it down and it just scatters into 5 different arrows. If you can fire it right at someone's feet, it's pretty much a one-shot.
So speaking of that scatter arrow, I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually the first ability I wanted to talk about after his regular bow shot. The scatter arrow is a weapon that you use. It has a 10-second cooldown, so once you shoot it, you'll have to wait 10 seconds before you can use it again. And it has a lot of interesting uses. It actually splits into multiple arrows, and it ricochets off walls and objects and actually can hit multiple targets at once. Now, what's cool about this ability is that it does function like a regular arrow when you shoot it. So, it doesn't have any more or less range than a regular arrow. However, the second it hits the wall, depending on the angle and where you're hitting, it has the potential to do pretty good amount of damage, and it creates a lot of chaos on the opposing team when they just start seeing arrows flying all over the place. I personally like to use it for characters, other snipers or some characters, they like to kind of camp out or hang in a small hallway. I feel like that's the best because the smaller the space that you use the scatter arrow, the more ricocheting and bouncing it's going to do, and the higher the chance that you're going to actually land an attack on the opponent.
Yeah, I think it's something like each scatter arrow break-off will bounce 3 times. So yeah, if you get it into a small room or a hallway, it's more likely that those 3 bounces will hit this person multiple times. So you can definitely one-shot somebody with it, whether you fire it at their feet or fire it into a hallway after them. If you get 2 or 3 of those ricochets to hit, they're going to drop unless they're a tank. So yeah, it's really effective.
And I tend to find that if an opponent does close the distance, close the gap, and gets real close to you, and, it's someone mobile like Tracer or Lucio, a lot of the times, you just tap that scatter arrow, notch it, shoot it, and a lot of the times you're going to have a better chance of hitting them with the scatter arrow than just a normal bow shot. So it's a great ability, and it has a lot of great uses.
Yeah, and it's cool that and also the Sonic Arrow, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment here, both of his ability arrows, you can already have pulled back a regular arrow to be ready to fire and then hit the ability, and it'll just swap the arrow out. So, you don't have to be unprepared. You can be in the middle of a series of shots and then just swap the ability arrow in and just keep going smoothly, which is pretty nice.
Now, that's a great point that you bring up because that is something that threw me off at first, and it's really, really important to know, especially if you're picking up Hanzo for the first time. So a lot of characters, when you use another ability or another weapon, you'll hit that button for that secondary ability, and then it uses it immediately. Hanzo is very different in that he has his normal bow, and then he has a scatter arrow and his sonic arrow. So he has 3 different arrows that he can use. But the arrow does not activate the second you hit the scatter arrow or sonic arrow ability. So you can actually pull back on the bow, have the arrow drawn back, ready to go, and then as you're running around with this drawn back bow, you can hit the scatter arrow button or you could hit the sonic arrow button, and it'll switch the arrow in real time with your drawn back bow. So if you decide while you're walking around a corner and you see somebody, oh, I want to use that scatter arrow, someone's right in front of me, you literally just hit the scatter arrow button and then let go of the bow. So even in gameplay, it feels like you're playing with a bow and arrow, and you have the ability to quickly switch back and forth, which I think is fantastic for this character because it fits the theme, and it's very unique just for a first-person shooter alone.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, and he's definitely unique. The sonic arrow, his other ability, it's another one that, I mean, as you said, you can swap it in as you're shooting, but that one actually is great for your whole team. It lets you, it basically reveals anybody within a radius on the other team that you can see the red outline through the wall, just like Widowmaker's ultimate. So it's really effective, and if you can actually hit an opponent with it, that radius will travel with the opponent. The arrow stays in them. So it's pretty effective. If you can land it on their tank, you can see where their team's moving. Yeah,
the sonic arrow is actually, I feel, in a lot of teams that I play where they use Hanzo, it's severely underused. And it's understandable. It's an ability that it has a 20-second cooldown. And while that seems like a long time, to consistently remember every 20 seconds, oh, I should use this. You know, you're in the middle of a battle. Things are chaotic. You're not always thinking about it. But it is so ridiculously important to use it because any character that allows you, and in Overwatch specifically, your entire team to see through walls and see where everybody's, hiding, what they're using for cover, how far they are, if there's anybody around you. I mean, it could instantly change the flow of a game because you're going from not being sure if you should run down a hallway to, hey, there's nobody in there, let's just rush the point, or, wow, there's 4 people around the corner. Maybe as a teammate, I can help out and use one of my ultimate abilities or help in some way. I mean, knowing the position of your characters, it's one of those things where, yeah, it's an ability that doesn't do damage, but it really, really is a great ability to use, and it's going to help out you and your teammates quite a bit.
Yeah, and also remember that it's still an arrow, and so even if you're in the middle of combat, you can shoot somebody with it. It's not like you have to fire it into a wall to see through that wall. So, yeah, I mean, even if you're just exchanging fire with somebody, if it's off cooldown, use the sonic arrow. If you hit them with it and they run away, you can see and follow them around the corner. So there's no reason not to do it. It's just you have to get in the habit of it.
So let's actually move on to Hanzo's ultimate ability, which is extremely popular, I feel, in the Overwatch community. This ability is known as Dragon Strike, or as he puts it, and I'm going to absolutely murder this, so I apologize in advance, it's Ryuga Waga Teki Wokurao, which translates to the dragon consumes my enemies. And
that was a bold effort.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your support. This ultimate ability is pretty impressive because what Hanzo does is he pulls back the arrow, he fires forward, and it shoots an arrow, and then about, I want to say, half a second to a second later, twin ghost dragons, actually follow the path of the arrow and move forward in front of Hanzo, basically doing ongoing ticking damage to everyone in its path. And this is a large space in front of Hanzo. I mean, there's an entire cone of space in front of him that is just the death zone. And it moves forward in front of him. It lasts 1.5 seconds, and it goes through walls. This move is one of my favorite ultimate abilities in Overwatch because you can literally, as the opponent fighting Hanzo, not see him, not know he's nearby, and then all of a sudden you hear this man screaming in Japanese and twin dragons are just in your face. It is an ultimate that does so much damage for a character that for the most part is always focused on one opponent at a time.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the more iconic ultimates. It's one of the posters you'd see. And yeah, super effective, really his best way to do group damage. And that's another thing that I feel like that used to wipe out whole teams. and it still can if you do it right, but now Hanzo has to be trickier when he does it, because going back to the beta, you'd fire that thing off and it was almost like people didn't know what it was. I mean, he's yelling really loudly and there's these really big dragons coming at you. So yeah, that's another thing that I've seen people get better at avoiding, and I've also seen Hanzos get better at timing them so that people can't avoid it. So it's definitely one of the cooler ultimates, and it can wipe a whole team if you're good about it.
And when you're talking about people kind of getting used to the moves, and like we mentioned at the start of the podcast, the community has improved. As you play, you're obviously going to get better. But one of the things that become really apparent to me is Blizzard's sound design in Overwatch. I definitely want to get into this in another episode because it's not something to just gloss over. However, I'm going to gloss over it right now. These sound effects, including the voices of the characters, the sounds the weapons make, little cues with the music, are hugely important. They're not just cool in the game, but they're actually hugely important in the gameplay and in the balancing of the game. Hanzo's Dragon Strike ability, and then, some of the other ultimates, such as Junkrat's ability. Yeah, and I know exactly. It's pretty clear with him as well. They're intentionally loud, and you can actually hear them like they're right next to you in your ear, even if they're across the level. And this is done intentionally because these moves are so overpowering that the only way to avoid them is to know that they're coming audibly. And I feel like that's a great thing that Blizzard did, because otherwise you'd just be standing there and all of a sudden dragons are busting through the wall that you're hiding behind. But if you hear him kind of winding it up and shooting it, you're now hyper aware and you're starting to move and try to dodge it. So it's not broken by any means. The move is extremely powerful. It goes through walls, but I feel that that's balanced out by the sound design and the ability to know that it's coming ahead of time and kind of prepare yourself for it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. This is not the sort of game you want to play on mute.
Not at all.
You've got to be able to hear what's going on. I think that the first thing that really it's a really subtle thing, but it impressed me, and we can talk about that in more detail later. But Lucio's weapon, the speaker gun that he uses, the sound that it makes when he's firing changes as he gets lower in ammunition, so you can actually hear that you're almost empty and are going to have to reload. Little things like that are really impressive to me, and I think they made the sound effects and the audio a big part of this game.
Yeah, that is so cool, especially with Lucio. Him being a DJ, it's so important to his character and his personality and the lore of that character to actually be very heavily involved with the sound. So we'll definitely get to that later, but it's something to keep in mind moving forward, that the sound effects, everything from the unique footsteps, every character's footsteps have different sound effects. It's really cool, and I think it's a great job that Blizzard did to kind of include this in the game. But going back to Hanzo, let's talk about character pairings. Both of us have played Hanzo quite a bit. I feel that we both play him very differently as well, and that's one of the exciting things about this game, is that you can play the same character but still play very differently, whether you're playing evasively or offensively or more of a sniper hanging back, or maybe you're jumping in there, getting in the mix, getting in the chaos a little bit. How has your Hanzo experience been, and what are some of the characters that you like to avoid? What are some of the characters that you just hunt down relentlessly?
Well, I think Hanzo, being a balanced character, he can be pretty effective against most other characters. I guess the ones that come to mind that he's particularly well suited to deal with, probably Bastion or Torbjorn and his turrets. Hanzo has the range to get at them and pop behind a wall and not have them return fire and then pop back out and hit him with another arrow. So he definitely is equipped to deal with that. Zenyatta is somebody that has really low health and usually hangs out towards the back, so you can get at them when they think that they're safe. And I suppose Roadhog, just because he's somebody you already want to keep so much distance from because of his chain, and he's such a big target that you can just hammer him over and over while you're at max range, and there's not much that he can do. As far as characters that I avoid, definitely Reinhardt. If he gets up close, there's not a whole lot Hanzo can do to get away from that hammer. And then really the flanker characters, some of the ones we talked about previously, like a Genji or Tracer, that they're going to come around and get in close and really give you trouble. You're probably only going to have one shot with your scatter arrow, and you got to make it count, because if you miss, those characters are probably going to kill you. And then the last one, I guess, Widowmaker. I know that's the other sniper, and this one could go either way, so this is more based on player skill. But generally speaking, I think Widowmaker probably has the advantage in that. Not to say that Hanzo couldn't win it, but her shots are instant and do a little bit more damage, and so I just think she has a slight advantage if you're in a matchup between snipers against a Widowmaker.
Yeah, I'd definitely say it's based on player skill for Widowmaker, because I know I've had trouble going against Widowmakers with Hanzo. Even though they're both snipers, you really do have to be on point and just get that solid shot on her. She doesn't have a whole lot of HP, so it's not too bad as long as you could land the hit, but landing the hit at a distance with Hanzo definitely takes some skill. As far as characters I like to avoid with Hanzo, I would say Tracer for sure. She's just too jumpy. She's all over the place, and once she's in your face, and even at a distance, I mean, a good Tracer is always going to be mobile, so it's going to be tricky to hit her. But once again, it really comes down to your ability to adapt and to really land those shots. I've seen a lot of great Hanzo players that can just seem to nail a shot every time, but even for myself, sometimes you have better games than others. There's times where you're nailing your headshots over and over again, and you're just on fire. And that's one of the great things about the character. It's just so much fun to play him because he's so unique. So as far as some other tips and tricks with Hanzo, we did mention earlier, the scatter shot in hallways, great thing to do. It's going to maximize your damage, your chance of hitting other characters. You want to utilize that sonic arrow as much as possible, and don't forget about that wall climb. It's a great way to get out of danger and into a great vantage point. And are there any other tips that you might have for Hanzo?
Well, we mentioned earlier the Sonic Arrow. Using it on cooldown is a big deal, and you can't say that enough because a lot of Hanzo players don't. I mentioned that it's a regular arrow and that you can shoot people with it. What's cool about that is, first of all, it follows them around, as I mentioned before, but they don't know that it was a Sonic Arrow. So, there's a few characters that can remove it, like Tracer can recall and lose that effect, or I believe Reaper can Wraith form and that effect will be lost, but they don't know to do it because they don't know they got hit by a special arrow. So it's almost always going to work unless they just happen to recall right away. And it's really effective for letting your team get the drop on the other team. Mainly, I see a lot of Hanzos that don't move around a lot. They wall climb up to a position they're really happy with, and then they stay there, and they get a couple kills there, and then the other team respawns, and they know exactly where Hanzo is. So I think moving around is pretty important just to keep the element of surprise. And the last thing, this is just kind of a funny little trick, but you can actually shoot these special arrows straight up in the air, and 18 seconds later they come down. So it can be useful, like if you know they're going to come through a doorway soon, you could run over to the doorway and fire your sonic arrow straight up in the air. And then 18 seconds later, it's going to hit the ground, and it's off cooldown for you again, so you can actually have two up at once. So you could fire another one to the other side of the doorway and cover more ground that way if you know that they all died and are going to respawn, so you have a window. So it's kind of more like a cool trick than a super effective thing, but there are uses for it, and if you're just standing on the point waiting for the other team to come back anyway, it can be a fun thing to do.
Yeah, you had told me about that earlier, and I gotta say, if there's any sort of technique you're using where you're shooting an arrow in the air and waiting 18 seconds for it to land again, you absolutely need to do that, because if not for effectiveness, that is just super cool. It's actually does have its uses, because like you said, sometimes, especially at the beginning of a match, it doesn't hurt to have two sonic arrows out and actually increase your range of seeing where everyone's coming from. So yeah, that's a super cool ability, very stylish, and just adds to the badassery that is Hanzo.
Yeah, and if you really wanted to mess with people, you could probably try and do something where you stand outside their spawn door and fire a scatter arrow up in the air 16 seconds early, and then the 2 seconds after the match starts, they run out the door and it comes down. You never know. Worth a shot, right?
I'm making this claim right now. If that happens to me, if I walk out a door, no one's around, and I get hit by a scatter arrow that kills me, I'm just going to log off right then and then. I'm done playing for the day.
But you'll know it was me, right?
Absolutely. Of course it was you. You're the only one who would pull that crap. So that was our summary on Hanzo. Great character, sniper, very mobile, can do a lot of damage, and one of the coolest ultimates ever. So, give him a try if you haven't already. And if you do have a lot of experience with Hanzo and maybe there's something we missed, then definitely reply in the comments, give us some feedback, and let us know if we missed anything.
Reality is my playground.
So let's talk about Symmetra. This is an interesting character. It's the first support character that we've talked about in our character breakdowns, and she is unique. She's doesn't follow the traditional FPS formula of doing a lot of damage or being a sniper or a heavy gun user or anything like that. She's really interesting in that she has a lot of power depending on the situation, but she's also more about knowing the map and knowing how to assist your team in setting up traps and sort of assisting in mobility. I know you've played a lot of Symmetra. How do you feel about her?
Yeah, Symmetra is one of my favorites, and I wanted to do her earlier in this series that we're doing because I feel like the game's still relatively new, and coming out of the beta, I feel like there was a perception out there that Symmetra was a weak character, that she needed buffed, or that she was not good, which I think is completely false. I think she, in a lot of ways, embodies what Blizzard is probably trying to accomplish with their goal of character creation here. She's very situational. She adds value to the team in non-traditional ways. She's almost never going to lead the team in kills, although it's possible. And so she's either really strong or really weak, depending on the situation. So you really need to know what's going to play to her strengths, what's going to help the team, and what's not. So she's really unique, and I really like her, and so I wanted to dive into this and sort of make my case for why I think she's a really good character.
For sure. So for those who, maybe haven't played the game a lot or have played but really haven't touched on Symmetra, she's an interesting character in that she literally bends reality, and she manipulates light in a way that it's actually physical, and she uses it in multiple different ways to build, to do damage, to create teleportation devices. Very, very interesting character, and she can be hugely, hugely helpful to a team if used correctly. So let's go ahead and start out with her normal attacking abilities. She has her main weapon is a photon projector. It has 100 ammo, and it is an extremely, and I have to absolutely put stress on this, extremely short range beam. The only way it does damage with its normal fire is to be right on top of a nearby enemy and just hold on to that beam and keep it on them as much as possible. Now, what's interesting about this, you might say, oh, what's the point of a character with a gun if I have to be close the whole time? Well, the interesting thing about the photon projector is that it deals continuous damage, and it actually tracks the enemy. So once it is on them, you don't have to have the reticle on them the whole time. It kind of, as long as they're nearby and they're still within that range, somewhat in front of you, it will stick onto them for a little while. And the longer it's on the enemy, the more damage it actually does. It actually increases the amount of damage it does. So it's a really, really useful weapon against all characters. Characters with low HP will go down like nothing if you're really close to them. And for tanks, I mean, as long as you can keep the beam on a tank long enough, over a few seconds, they're going to go down quick.
Oh yeah, it's one of the more powerful weapons in the game if someone gets close enough for you to use it. Which is, again, why I think she's so situational, because you've got to put yourself in positions where you're going to get close to people before you're fighting them. I mean, if you're going to run at somebody from 50 yards away, you're not going to be very effective. But yeah, the left click, it locks on, and as you said, it charges up to do pretty massive damage. And so basically what you want to do with it is just lock onto people and jump around like a maniac, make yourself as hard as possible to hit, because you're still locked onto them if you're facing anywhere in their general direction. So yeah, you can really wipe people out, and you can take groups of people because they're all having trouble targeting you if you're jumping around between them and you're just picking them off one at a time. Once the beam gets charged up, it stays charged up for, I think it kind of winds down, but something like 3 or 4 seconds, it'll stay more powerful than if it started. So if you get 3 or 4 people into a room and you just kind of go from one to the other, it stays at max power when you lock onto the new target.
Or in the situation where the opponents are guarding a point, or the payload, a lot of the times the opponents will make the mistake of staying too close together, which in some situations is good because you can put a Reinhardt shield down, maybe have a Mercy in there. But if you can get a Symmetra in there and basically get really close to 4 characters without them noticing, you can potentially kill the entire team with just that character. And this is a character that is not an attack character. She's considered a support, but she absolutely has the ability to take out a team if used correctly. Now, the alternate fire that she has on the photon projector is an actual charging move. It charges an energy ball that deals really, really high damage, and it's actually longer range. So whereas her normal fire has to be close range, her alternate energy ball does go out a distance, and it has some pretty interesting effects.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is one of the only things in the game that will go straight through Reinhardt's shield, and it will go straight through other players too. It doesn't hit somebody and impact or splash on them. So basically, if you had the other team in a single file line, like in a hallway or something, you could fire that orb down there and it would go through them and hit all 6 for the same amount of damage. So the right click is really powerful. It's also really slow. So I usually find it best to target it at areas where I expect the other team to be and not trying to target a specific person, because whether they see it coming or not, they'll probably change directions and move before it gets there. It's basically going almost the same speed that characters run. So it's not a fast attack by any means, but it is powerful. And if you use it right and use it in the right situations, it will wipe out a team for sure.
Yeah, the ability to go through Reinhardt's shield, I mean, that's huge because there's so many characters who are effective up until that shield goes up, and it's extremely frustrating and, intentional when an entire team hides behind a shield and there's nothing you can go to get through. And then here you come with Symmetra. You charge up that move, shoot through, and in a situation like that, chances are, if not 2, maybe even more, it's possible you can hit an entire team with just that one move. And on some of the lower HP characters, just take them out immediately.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. She can really wipe people out. And so another combo that she can pull off that's really effective, if you get people coming around a corner at you or like a Reinhardt bringing the team forward, you can charge up the right click, pop around the corner and fire it, and then follow it in and kind of almost use it to cover yourself, and they see the right click coming, and then all of a sudden you're right there too, and you've got your left click locked onto Reinhardt, and now the whole team's vulnerable. So yeah, you can get pretty tricky with Symmetra and really be devastating. You mentioned earlier, it's funny that she's categorized as a support. I feel like her and Zenyatta also, I mean, they support, so I get why they're in that category, but they are just as offensive as they are defensive.
Yeah, I feel the interesting thing that Blizzard did with their support characters is support is almost a vague word because they can be used in a very balanced way for both attack and defense. And with Symmetra, the photon projector is definitely a great way to approach someone with an attack. Now, let's actually move on to her next ability, which I feel is a little more defensive, and it's interesting because she is considered a builder type character, kind of like Torbjorn, who can pull down turrets. She has turrets as well, but it's actually a different type of turret. It's more advanced. It's called a sentry turret, and she has the ability to set up these sort of sentry turrets that are very small devices that you can actually put on the wall or ceilings around the map. And they're basically proximity turrets. So the second someone walks by them, they will lock onto an enemy and just start doing continual damage with a laser shot. Very interesting turret and a very interesting ability for her because you can actually put multiple out at once.
Yeah, you can have up to 6 out at once, and they have 1 health, so it's really more about hiding them and putting them in places that are hard to shoot at and getting the jump on people with it. So yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, they'll pretty much stick to any surface in the game. I mean, you can get creative with that. You can put them in the middle of a tire or underneath a car, just all over the place. But you usually don't want to group them too close together because it just makes it easier for somebody to take them all out. They only have 1 health, so if Winston runs in and 6 are next to each other, he kills them all immediately, or someone with a shotgun or something like that. So spreading them out, putting them places that people wouldn't necessarily expect on the ceiling or behind objects is usually your best bet. But they're pretty short range, but very powerful.
On the flip side of that, though, if you do put 6 of them close together, although it's a very risky setup and it's very easy to get rid of, I remember specifically a match that you were in pretty recently where I believe you got play of the game by having 6 turrets inside a room, and their entire team decided that they were just going to stroll in.
Yeah, I'll actually be putting up a YouTube video to accompany this podcast, just sort of breaking down Symmetra in a little bit more detail. But yeah, that's the sort of thing that can happen with her if you know the map and are able to anticipate where a team is likely to go. You can get a situation where the whole team runs into these turrets, and between the turrets and Symmetra's left click, you can kill the entire other team almost by yourself. So yeah, it's really about placement with them. When I say spreading them out, I don't mean out of range of each other. I just mean not literally right next to each other. So, maybe 2 over opposite corners of a doorway, and then 2 a little bit back off the wall, just far enough apart that one shotgun blast isn't going to kill 4 of them,
Yeah, there's definitely options with her, and that's one of the interesting things about this ability is that you really have the potential to kind of create your own trap system for enemies to kind of walk through. Also, before we move on, I do want to mention as well that not only do these turrets do damage, but they do reduce the walking speed of someone who gets hit by it. So not only are you taking continual damage, but it's making it more difficult to get away from the damage because you're actually moving slower as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. It makes it even more like they walked into a trap when you set it up, and they walk in and they're slowed in the doorway, and you can almost see that they realize they're helpless, but it's a funny moment, absolutely.
So her next ability is her Photon Shield, which is an interesting one because it's a shield that you can actually put on allies. So it's definitely more of a support move. It's definitely more of a move that's going to increase the longevity of your team. But I feel a lot of Symmetras that I've come across, similar to we were talking about Hanzo's sonic arrow that allows you to see. It's very easy, especially if you're attack oriented and just want to do as much damage as possible, to forget to continually keep up the shield on your allies, but it is very important.
Yeah, and the shield is a big deal. It's only 25 health, so it's not going to be the number one difference between whether your team won or lost, more than likely. But for some characters like Zenyatta or Tracer, 25 health feels like a lot more, and there's no reason not to do it. It's just people being lazy, or maybe if you're playing by yourself and playing with people you don't know, maybe it doesn't seem as important to you. But there's no reason not to do it, and what's cool about it is that, as we mentioned earlier with the difference between health and shields and armor, it will recharge. So it's adding 25 health to their total HP until they die. So if they get shot down to 100 health, that 25 shield will charge back, which is pretty neat. And, similar to, Symmetra can't put the shield on herself, but half of her health is shield. And so if she drops down to 100 health, that'll all charge back up because it's all shield. So the shields are pretty cool, and there's no reason not to do it. It's helpful. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but you should do it. You're there to support your team, and that's you can't heal, so that's really the only thing you can do to increase the longevity of your teammates.
Yeah, any sort of increase in HP that, as an opportunity for your team is going to help, even if it's just 25, to continually have that right off the bat. If the other team doesn't have a Symmetra, or if they do and they're not doing their job of putting up those shields, you're just going to have overall more HP and rechargeable HP than the other team. And every little bit counts in this game for sure, because there's so many times where you come out of a scrap and you just barely survive, and that 25 might just make the difference. So Symmetra's ultimate ability is interesting because it's one of my favorite ultimate abilities in that it's not one that actually does any damage. In fact, it does no damage. It doesn't hurt the opponent in any way. It's actually a great way to support your own team. She's able to basically put down a teleporter, and when your allies spawn back from death, they actually are able to walk through now a portal that just opens up at the spawn point and immediately teleport to where the teleporter is on the map. So this is something that's interesting because you're able to cut down the travel time of your allies getting back into the action depending on where you put the teleporter. And right away, this is going to increase your ability to push forward, especially in some of those situations where you're trying to get on a payload or on a point.
Yeah, the teleporter is really awesome. I would say that exactly how awesome it is depends on the map and the situation in the game, because it's saving your team from running back. So on certain maps, the run back is a really long way. Like Volskaya, it feels like is a minute. So getting that teleporter down, it more or less saves the team. If your team dies at point A in Volskaya, you're going to lose it unless you have a teleporter up. But maybe it's not as effective if you've lost point A at point B because the run back is not nearly as far. So what I will often do on certain maps like Volskaya or Hanamura, where they're capture points, if we lose point A, I'll swap off of Symmetra because the teleporter at that point becomes much less valuable. Still serves some value if you really want to play Symmetra, but just in terms of getting the most bang for your buck and helping the team in the best way, I feel like Symmetra on defensive maps is much more valuable defending the first point. And then the other direction with that, when you're on attack, I think the further into the map you get, the more effective the teleporter can be if you wanted to play Symmetra on attack. Generally, I would recommend her more on a defensive position because you can set your turrets up and kind of wait for people. But I've seen people do it on attack, and it's certainly viable, and the teleporter makes it worth it.
Yeah, and as far as strategies go for Symmetra, I would definitely recommend dropping some turrets maybe around the health packs. Generally, the health packs are going to be in enclosed indoor areas, small hallways, rooms, things like that in all of the maps. Perfect situation for dropping 2 or 3 turrets, doing continual damage, slowing them down, and if you're chasing opponents in there, that's only going to help your team and killing someone who's trying to rush to the health pack to try and survive. And also, yeah, like you said, for the teleporter, putting it in a spot where opponents aren't going to find it easily. I know that's kind of tough if they're trying to track you down and they're aware that you have Symmetra, but hey, in a lot of situations, that's not what their focus is. So, putting it around a corner in a small room or hallway, or maybe on a second level that's not easily accessible to certain characters, is a great way to just have your teammates continually funneling into the action one after another. But going back to what we said earlier about sound design, if you're fighting a team with Symmetra, definitely keep an ear out for your teammates, because one of your teammates will say on the radio chatter, hey, they have a teleporter or something to that effect. And once again, that's another way of using sound design to kind of balance it out. If a teleporter is up, you're not just going to not know about it. Your own teammates are going to let you know about it as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely something that you want to be really careful with your placement of the teleporter, because the other team is going to know about it and they're going to be hunting for it. To each their own on whether or not you think this is a great idea, but I have seen some players that will actually hold the teleporter once it's up and not place it until the other team makes a push. And that way, A, you don't use up the charges because you only have 6 charges on the teleporter, and B, the other team can't hunt it down beforehand. So, that can be effective, but you might only also have 3 people to defend the push because 3 people are running back because you didn't put the teleporter down earlier. So you got to kind of play it out. But yeah, it's definitely something the other team's going to know about, so you got to be careful.
Yeah, and that definitely goes back to something we said in an earlier episode, which, as you mentioned, it's just depending on play style, not necessarily a right or wrong way to do things. But I generally find that just because you have an ultimate ability ready to use doesn't mean you should use it right away. Sometimes you want to wait for that perfect opportunity, whether it be a teleporter, whether it be Reaper's Death Blossom, anyone. You want to hold on to that ultimate for a situation that's going to really help out. And sometimes if it's a very fast charging ultimate, maybe you just want to use it and kind of knock back the opponents for a bit because you know that you're going to get another ultimate pretty soon. So it really just depends on weighing the situation, figuring out what you want to do, how you want to play it, and that's what makes it fun. It's very, very dynamic in the play style.
Yeah, and one other thing about the teleporter, it charges up really fast if you're doing damage with Symmetra, be it through the turrets or through her actual right click or left click. You can get that teleporter to 100% in placed in what feels like 30 seconds when the match starts if you're actually landing some of the energy orbs that you're shooting or if anyone runs into your turrets.
For sure. So let's talk about character pairings. Similar to how we've mentioned with some of the other characters. What are some characters that you like to avoid when you're playing Symmetra, and what are some characters that you like to absolutely hunt down when you're playing Symmetra?
Well, Symmetra is a little bit unique, especially when you're playing her on defense, because you don't really hunt people down, but you try and anticipate where they're going to be. I think Symmetra is pretty much a hard counter to like Tracer or Genji. There's not a whole lot that they can do to get past Symmetra or really to kill her at all. They don't have the health to identify and deal with the turrets, and even if they did, Symmetra can lock onto them and do more damage than they can in most cases. Reaper, a little bit less so, because if Reaper lands a really good shotgun blast, he could take you out. But still, it feels like Symmetra has the advantage in that encounter. But really, she's so unique because of her playstyle and because of the way that she sets up. Anyone who runs into that trap is going to be at a disadvantage, whether it's tanks or, I mean, just about anybody that runs in there is going to get wiped out. As far as characters that I think Symmetra's weak against, I guess Winston or a character like that has a spread shot because they would have the best chance to take out the turrets if they're looking for them. Diva, similarly. Also, characters with explosives like Pharah or Junkrat can fire in there if they know that there's turrets, and they can take some of them out, but they usually won't get all of them, especially if you place them on the ceiling. I mean, really, the worst thing that can happen with Symmetra, though, is you're setting up and you guess wrong, and the other team never shows up there. Then not only did you not get any kills, but you basically just handicapped your team. It's like they only had 5 players because Symmetra set up at the wrong spot. So, I mean, yeah, that's why going back to like map knowledge, it's really important that Symmetra can anticipate where they're going to go, and on every map that might be a little bit different.
Yeah, map knowledge is very important for Symmetra for sure, and it's interesting because Blizzard intentionally, especially with a lot of these support characters, wanted to create a class and types of characters that weren't necessarily about that quick twitch skill level, the ability to just keep the reticle on your opponent and do as much damage as possible. It's really about knowing your map. And a lot of the times, if you're not as good or you're just not as interested in, getting in that gunfight, just exploring the map, knowing where to set traps is just as damaging and useful to your team as any of the other rules. So Symmetra and Torbjorn, who we'll definitely get to later, it's going to be important to explore the map, really know where to set your traps, know the ins and outs of every hallway, every open space. And as far as characters I like to avoid when I play her, I would definitely think that she's probably weakest against snipers. I think everyone's weak against snipers, but she, besides her alternate fire, which is that long-range ball, very obvious, doesn't move very quickly, so she really has almost no answer to a sniper. So if you're playing Symmetra, your best bet is not to be out in the open a whole lot, unless it's a situation where you can do a lot of damage to someone and get out quickly before you can get hit. But definitely avoid those snipers. And me personally, I know it's a little bit aggressive, but I just love to go after those tanks, especially people like Reinhardt. If they're not paying attention, they have a high HP, you can easily take them down if they're not paying attention with her close range fire. It just does, that photon projector does a lot of damage as long as you keep it on them. And with a character like Reinhardt, like Roadhog, who don't have the ability to move very quickly, you can do a lot of damage to them before they even realize what you're doing. So I'd say definitely get in close for those attacks, know the map, set up traps, and have a lot of fun with her because there are many different ways to play her.
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoy Symmetra. I think she's one of the more unique characters in the game that really allows you to be creative with how you play her. I just wanted to add really quickly, I know you mentioned that she's weak against snipers. I couldn't agree with that more. The number one thing that I would encourage people to do if you're playing Symmetra is to not be in the open. She doesn't have any sort of attack to engage in any sort of open firefight. She basically needs to live exclusively in the flanks and in side rooms and hallways. She can pop out and move with the group if she needs to, but yeah, I mean, you don't have any business staring down a Widowmaker. You're not going to do anyone any good there.
I definitely agree with that for sure. She's an interesting character to play, and it's going to take a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimentation, but try her out. And once again, if there's anything that maybe we didn't talk about or a strategy that you like to use, please let us know. Give us your feedback, and we'd love to talk about it. So that was our in-depth character breakdown on both Hanzo and Symmetra. I hope you guys were able to learn some new information. Once again, send us your feedback, your responses if you have anything to add. Check us out on Twitter. I'm on @HappyJamOP, and we also have a Twitch channel. Do you want to share that with them, Jeff?
Yeah, the Twitch channel is under my username, Truthitter. We're going to be setting the link up on our website, oppodcast.com. I also mentioned earlier I'm going to be putting up a YouTube video to accompany this podcast to kind of highlight some of Symmetra's gameplay if you want a visual aid for it. So that'll be on our YouTube channel, and you can find that through our website as well. And then lastly, we're going to attach a link. We talked a little bit about the difference between health, armor, and shields in this podcast, and so we're just going to attach a link because we didn't want to get into too much detail about exactly how much damage armor mitigates and in what situations. So we're going to attach a link to that if you really want the details. You can read up on it a little bit.
Most definitely. So, yeah, check out the link in the description. Please give us your comments, your feedback. Please subscribe to the podcast. If you have anything to add, we'd love to hear from you guys. And once again, thank you for joining us on the OP Overwatch podcast, and we look forward to seeing you next time.